Robby, what is on your radar today?
Well, Brianna, earlier this year, the existence of something called the Disinformation Governance Board was revealed to the world for the first time. This board was a creation of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and intended to advise other government agencies on strategies for identifying and countering harmful misinformation that might relate to national security issues. Well, critics all across the political spectrum found this board to be Orwellian and creepy, and almost no one was reassured by the board's director, Nina Jankowicz, a so-called misinformation expert with a long history of herself falling for bad online information, like the idea that the Hunter Biden laptop story was a fake Russian plot. Thankfully, the government shuttered the Disinformation Board in what appeared to be a rare example of the national intelligence sector actually listening to the public. Well, of course, that was too good to be true. We knew it would be. The Disinformation Board still dead, but the federal government, fortunately not, vis-a-vis this national security apparatus, absolutely committed still to policing what it dubiously refers to as misinformation. And in fact, these efforts are potentially crossing legal and constitutional lines, and government agents begin to purge misinformation in ways that clearly impugn First Amendment principles. Remember that the U.S. Constitution prohibits the government from restricting speech, even speech that is uncomfortable or provocative or wrong, except in a few very exceptional Supreme Court recognized circumstances. But despite the robust protections of the First Amendment, the federal government is making every effort to pressure social media companies into punishing speech. Examples of this are everywhere, and speech relating to COVID-19 is especially jeopardized. Remember the federal government's efforts to push social media companies to censor discussions of the lab leak theory? Well, more examples now come to us courtesy of excellent reporting by Li Fang and Ken Klippenstein of The Intercept, who obtained leaked internal documents from DHS that shed additional light on the lengths to which Homeland Security will go in order to police legitimate speech. Now, according to The Intercept, Facebook maintains a special portal for law enforcement to make requests that content be removed from the platform. Indeed, the portal exists here. We were able to find it, and requires law enforcement credentials to access it. Now, there are certainly kinds of content I can imagine where it would make sense for law enforcement to be able to put in such a request. How about threats of violence or terrorist activity, for instance? National security agents should be focused on policing those things, terrorism and actual violence. That's their purpose. The national security state, however, is vastly outgrowing and exceeding its original mandate and is now treading in some very murky waters. According to The Intercept, the FBI's Laura Demlow briefed a cybersecurity agency on the spread of misinformation, warning that, quote, "We need a media infrastructure that is held accountable." Excuse me? Another DHS report obtained by The Intercept explained that its coming priorities are preventing, quote, "inaccurate information" on a wide range of topics, including, quote, "the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, racial justice, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of U.S. support to Ukraine." Well, these are policy subjects on which Americans and their elected leaders possess a range of views, and on which the mainstream media and the U.S. government have often been the very worst spreaders of inaccurate information. Just think how frequently the consensus has shifted on COVID topics, from the origins of the pandemic to the efficacy of mitigation efforts to the likely modes of spread. What does it mean to spread inaccurate information about the U.S.'s support for Ukraine? Does Homeland Security aim to criminalize attempts to cast aspersions on the U.S.'s continued funding of the war effort? Look, this should be obvious, but not all conversations come down to information and misinformation. Sometimes people on both sides of a debate are extremely well informed, have credible information, simply disagree about the best way to handle a problem. I think that happens on our show all the time. Sometimes people on both sides of a debate are equally misinformed, independent of whatever conclusions they're drawing. Maybe that happens every now and then too. Sometimes one person is wrong and the other person, a scientist, a professor, or otherwise expert, has far more technical knowledge, but for one reason or another supports a bad policy. Foreign policy is one area of policy where this third scenario comes up a lot. Some of the most well-informed national security experts in government and in the media have historically been the most hawkish, the most in favor of disastrous foreign adventurism in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and Afghanistan. These people are the ones dabbling in counter-misinformation? How can we trust them? Of course we can't. We'd be fools to do so. And that's why it's so concerning that this entire apparatus is speeding up, is increasing its efforts to regulate, to censor, to punish what you're allowed to talk about online. So it was excellent reporting from your former colleagues at The Intercept.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was really good stuff. And provides more real concrete evidence of a phenomenon that we all know is happening, that we've learned more about. That, and I've started saying this to conservatives who are very worried about social media censorship, and obviously many on the left are as well. But the disproportionate focus has been on the platforms themselves. Like, look at all the emails and messages, and the Cato Institute has a great paper on this recently calling it jawboning. That's their term for it. This is an old legal term. You might know it was used in some other context. They're using it for this. Jawboning is the government pushing a private actor or a platform like Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, to restrict speech. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to pass a law saying they could do that because the First Amendment prohibits it. So they just kind of go, we'd really like if you took this down.
Yeah.
And there's an upcoming congressional committee hearing on, some antitrust measure relating to you. It would really suck for you if we were mad at you by the time that rolled around. So what are you doing about that content?
Yeah.
And this is happening all the time on election stuff, yes, but then also on COVID stuff, national security, Ukraine. They're going to Ukraine-related misinformation.
Oh boy.
Are you going to survive, Brianna, the Ukraine-related misinformation purge on Twitter?
I don't think so, and I might have already succumbed to it. I mean, I've spoken to about it on the show that a lot of people, across a political spectrum, but obviously I speak to a lot of leftists who've noted that at a certain point in the last year and a half or so, they have had a block, a limitation, a soft ban or whatever is going on with their follower growth. It's their followers say that they don't see their tweets anymore in the timeline. And when the story broke yesterday, a lot of folks said, oh, this feels familiar to me. Maybe I've been caught up in one of these misinformation purges or suppressions. And it's very, very concerning. And I do also think this puts it raises some questions about how much of this is structural and how much someone like Elon Musk, even with the best intentions, is actually going to be able to push back against both this and the fact that so much is what is driving this policy, if not the government going nudge, 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 is the fact that these websites are set up to earn money through advertising. And they're very beholden to what the advertisers want.
Well, that's why I'm very cautiously optimistic about the Elon takeover. I'm hoping he can just shed more information so we can better understand how the circumstance that you found yourself in, that some other people I know from Twitter found themselves in, where their follower growth stops abruptly and artificially. I would love if he made that more apparent. He said he wants to charge people for blue checks. People are like, that's insane. I would never pay. Well, I would pay if it meant I was never put in the category of being shadow banned. What other things does it protect you from this? I mean, really, no one should be put in that nefarious circumstance. The thing.
You shouldn't have to be paid. You shouldn't have to pay for equal access to the app and equal treatment on the app. I will say that the blue check discourse is kind of hilarious. I think a lot of blue checks like myself, I already do pay for Twitter Blue because I have a podcast that allows me to put clips longer than 2 minutes and 20 seconds on the internet. So what's confusing is there are services that Twitter can provide above and beyond the basic service that I think people would be willing to pay for. It's weird to try to retrofit something that people already have and extract money from them for it. People have obviously been talking about how not profitable Twitter has been in the past and how perhaps this wasn't the wisest business decision, and that this kind of charging scheme might ultimately be the death knell of the app. But honestly, it's because Twitter is so important that I don't think that's going to happen. And it is why there is all of this attempt at interference from the government. They actually know that this is one of the most significant public forums in the country. Maybe only 3% of people are on Twitter, but it has a much bigger radius in terms of its effect on journalism.
Significant not because the masses use it so much, but because of the unique importance, fondness for the platform among media media and government officials. And that's why. And frankly, I think Elon knows that. I mean, if he bought this hoping to make a ton of money, he'd be very foolish. Right. But I don't think he's very foolish. He's a savvy businessman. I think he wants to have some. What he said is he wants to improve this this forum for public officials and intellectuals that it's been too tilted or badly run in the past. He wants to change some things about it. Might disagree with some of those changes. We might like them. We kind of have to wait and see. Yeah. But it's an interesting shakeup.
Yeah, and I will say this. Even if I wonder if most of this is structural and Elon won't be able to do much to change it, I do think that Elon is more likely than other types of CEOs to blow the whistle and expose the ways in which he's being constrained, and that can make for some good reporting and some much needed transparency.
Well, I just keep seeing him now respond to people, mostly right-wing people who keep tagging him, what about this piece of content? I don't like, the content moderation decision cannot be solved by personally tagging Elon Musk. That's not
Elon!
Well, we'll have more on this story tomorrow. Lee Fong, the author of that great Intercept piece on what DHS is doing, will be joining us to expand on it. So you'll want to catch that, and then we'll have more Rising Today right after this.